Hello and welcome to our free webinar, How to Get Investment for Your Idea in Australia Without Even Needing a Product. My name is Adrian Osman. I'm one of the co-founders here at Pitch Black and also the CEO. Been in the startup space now for a long time and really looking forward to sharing a lot of the things that I've learned across my journey and the rest of our partners' journey in the startup space. So before we get into it, who is this webinar actually right for? Now, the reason that we created this webinar was because for years now, we've been doing introduction calls with founders and aspiring entrepreneurs, and we found that we were always saying exactly the same stuff. We were teaching the same content over and over again, which isn't great because it means that that's less time that we're adding value to you and more time teaching identical content. So this came about so that we could actually teach you all of these things straight away. And then when we do end up talking, we can get right down to how we can help with your idea or your startup. So the people this is perfect for, you might have an idea for a mobile app or a web platform or a physical product, but you just don't know where to start in the journey. What are the first steps that you need to take to turn that into a reality? And you might also be worried about having to self-fund everything on your own because it can be expensive to get these new ideas off the ground and you might not want to spend all of your life savings on it. So if you're either of those things or both, you're in the perfect place. Now we've designed this workshop so that you can walk away with some really tangible value, regardless of whether or not we continue talking with each other. So what you're going to walk away with today is firstly our 3 Ps on how to get investment. So there's 3 words that start with P that are really easy to remember, that you can keep at the back of your mind. Who you can actually approach for investment. We get asked about this all the time. Should you be going to bigger investors who are more sophisticated or people who are just new to investment, your own network? So we get asked about that a lot. 3 things investors really hate that you can avoid bringing up completely, which will make you look like a much more mature startup founder. And if you wait right through to the end, there's actually 3 questions that we've stumbled across that's raised millions of dollars that you can just ask someone to really convey that you're the right person to do this idea and that the idea is worth doing and investing in. So make sure you hang around until the end to get all of the value out of this. And I also want to note that there is no offer or payment to make at the end of this webinar. It is really educational. We do this again so that when we do end up speaking to you, you've got all of this core knowledge and we can get right down to how we can help and whether or not the idea is worth pursuing in the first place or not. So again, there will be the opportunity to apply to chat to us, but there is no sell at the end of this workshop. And you might also be wondering, okay, who is this guy? So I won't go into depth about this, but just so you understand a little bit about my story, here's a photo of me pretty happily eating some sort of food. I can't remember it obviously, but I'm in my sort of mid to late 20s now. Didn't go to university after I finished school, so I was always, I guess, entrepreneurial at heart. Always knew that I wanted to do my own thing, and I started my own businesses around the age of 19 with my business partner, the other original founder of Pitch Black, and we really struggled in the first sort of 3 to 4 years to get any of our crazy ideas off the ground. We did have a small business going that was sort of paying the bills, but any of these big crazy ideas that we had for things that were more scalable, we were doing a pretty average job of. So we, like most entrepreneurs, failed the first bunch of things that we did, probably 5+ things in a row, and we're not proud of those failures. They cost a lot of time and money that we would rather have in our pocket and not have wasted. So really big on believing that you don't have to fail companies to learn lessons. You can learn those lessons from other people, and that is why we started Pitch Black in the first place. We're still, since figuring out a bit more about this model, we are very active in doing our own companies. So we tween out the partner and Pitch Black. There's 4 of us. We've raised just under 20 mil Australian for our own startups, our own tech companies. These are mostly software companies. I've now got a portfolio of tech and services businesses, and you can check that out on my LinkedIn if you'd like to look at the links and read up more about them. I'm not going to go into them in depth into this. And most importantly to you, we've helped other entrepreneurs in Australia now over the past 3 to 4 years to raise millions of dollars for their own startups. And that's really what we're most proud of, not more so than our own achievements. Pitch Black is the way that we do that. We're really heavily endorsed by Glenn Richards, who you've probably seen on the Australian Shark Tank. Glenn is the founder of Pet Barn and Green Cross, and he doesn't have any equity in Pitch Black, nor has he been paid to be our ambassador. It's probably what we're doing is probably something that he would have liked to have done to support early stage entrepreneurs, but it's a lot of work. And he probably didn't want to put in that much work when he can just be backing good founders who are already doing work on Shark Tank. So he sort of put his weight behind us because he believes in what we're doing and the mission that we have. Now, so why do you actually need to raise money? We get asked this all the time. And thinking again of doing something scalable like an app or web platform or a physical product, we think it's near impossible to do really well without raising money. So in some way, there's going to be a decent chunk of money spent in the first year to two, and that's either going to come from your pocket or others. So one really cool thing about raising money is that sharing the risk with multiple people as opposed to only yourself putting in all of the capital that's required to build a great company and a great product. So the first point here, great products actually do cost a lot of money to make. The thing that we find the most confusing is that if you want to start a cafe, for example, if you think of anyone around you that's wanted to start a cafe, people will get loans out to the tune of $500,000, $600,000, remortgaging their houses. They put everything on the line, they quit their job, and then open often a pretty shitty cafe that has very little upside financially of becoming a huge business. These are tough business models, thin margins, and really high risk. So for some reason, people are willing to do that to open what we think is a pretty crappy business. Yet when people have an idea for something scalable, a business that they believe can be worth millions or tens of millions or more in the future, for some reason, a lot of people think that you can get those sorts of ideas off the ground for $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. It's just not the case. It does cost a decent amount of money. There's some things we're going to teach you on this webinar about how to save a lot of money in that process. So you don't have to spend over $100K yourself, but it costs a decent chunk of money to create a great product, whether it's physical or software. Also, full-time focus is important. Again, going back to that cafe example, you don't see people starting cafes and then just opening it and staying in their corporate job. When people start a cafe, they start a cafe and they're in the grind in that business, usually most days of the week, to make that business work. Again, there's less upside to owning a cafe than owning something really scalable that could be worth a fortune. So of course, it's going to take just as much focus as a cafe, if not more, to work on your startup as it would to work on a cafe. So keep that in mind. You don't have to quit your job straight away, but having full-time focus would be the biggest ingredient in our minds as to what will make something work quickly in the early days. You also raise money to stay ahead of your competitors. So it's really hard to protect a lot of ideas in the innovation space, particularly software ones. So the way that we actually, when we build software companies, the way that we stay ahead of our own competition is we try and raise enough money so that they're pretty far behind us. So it actually can be a protection mechanism. And also you need money to be able to hire the technical person or team that you need to deliver on your product. We're going to talk later about why you shouldn't outsource that, why you should have control of your product. But you're going to need to pay a salary there for someone in-house to actually make your app or website, or if it's a physical product, you need budget to create your actual prototype. So that's why you need money, and that's why it can add up to a fair bit. And if we look at some examples, which usually surprises people, two really big names, Uber and Airbnb. So firstly, Uber, you can see here from this screenshot from Crunchbase, they've raised over $20 billion so far, US, to become the name that you recognize and to become a service that's available in so many different markets. Over $20 billion US that has been invested in the company to get it to that point. And Airbnb, $4.4 billion has been invested. Again, the same, different market, but still peer-to-peer. They've needed $4.4 billion to become the brand that they've become today. So if these companies had tried to grow on their cash flow, you would have never heard of them. That's the biggest point. So startups raise money because cash flow isn't enough. You need a lot of money to be ahead of your competitors. And if you want to build something national or global, you pretty much don't have an option other than to raise money and get investment. So how much investment do you actually need? So the first round of investment that a startup gets is called your pre-seed round. And for pre-seed, you're not just raising money only to build your product. This is a huge mistake people make. They if they have an app or website idea, they get quotes on how much it would cost to build that product. And then they assume that that quote will form the majority of the capital that's required to make that a successful business. That is completely wrong. You're starting a business here, just like when you're starting a cafe, and you need enough capital to get you through the early stage milestones of your business to get to a point where you've hit those milestones and you can raise further capital, like you saw with Uber and Airbnb earlier. So you can raise a second round, which is called seed, to then scale and take it to the next level. So you actually need, generally speaking, 12 to 18 months of what we call runway to cover things like at least you being full-time, or if there's two founders, one of you being full-time in the business, imperative. A technical hire, so that might be a software engineer, could be different if it's a physical product, designing your product, marketing and sales, and then the more boring stuff like legal and accounting, but obviously you have to do that as well. So those things in Australia easily add up to 150 to 300k quite easily, and that's when you actually have your product in-house. If you outsource that, which we'll talk about later, the costs are far higher than that. So this doing it pretty much as thrifty as you can and doing it well at a high quality to actually start a good business, that's the sort of figure that you're looking at, 150 to 300k. And obviously most people don't have that lying around in the bank, so that's why getting investment is so important. I want to also now talk about something called the trough. This is not that widely spoken about in the startup world. There's a little bit out there, but unfortunately we've seen way too many horror stories of people who have fallen into this trough and haven't been able to get out. So very simply, you need enough capital in your pre-seed round, and your pre-seed is before you build your product. Before you really launch or get into anything, you need enough capital to get through this trough, through to the point that you're going to have solid numbers. So where people get caught is they only get enough capital to make their product, but they don't really have enough capital to focus on it, like quit their job or to do the marketing and sales to the level that would be required. So they launch really underfunded. They build a product which is probably okay. They launch, and now they're on the right of that purple circle, and they're in the trough, and they just do not have enough money for those things that I mentioned, and they get stuck. And what happens there is, on the right, where we've written solid numbers, that's where a lot of great investors like venture capitalists and angels, a lot of people that can really help you take that company to the next level are waiting there in that green circle for you to have solid numbers to present to them. So they're not interested in talking to you because you're stuck. Then on the left, before product launch, where you've got your pre-seed there on the left, your initial investors that helped you get off the ground, it's not a very inspiring story to go back to them to say, hey, we launched, we don't have enough money, our numbers look pretty shit, can we have more money to make our numbers look good? So this is really, really important. If you don't have enough capital to get through that trough, you get stuck there, and then it becomes infinitely harder to get capital to get out of the trough. So it almost kills every startup that's out there. So don't underestimate the amount of capital that's required to get a product out in the market and to have numbers that look solid enough to get through that trough and over to the types of investors on the right of this example. Cool, so now that you know that you need to raise a decent chunk of pre-seed to get through that trough and get some real solid numbers, what are investors looking for? What do you need to be able to show them? And we like to break that down into 3 very simple P's: proof, perception, and passion. And I'm going to go through each of them now so you understand how to approach it. And there's some really tangible examples and screenshots that you're going to see so that you can use this and actually apply it straight after watching this if you want. So firstly, proof. The biggest thing that Pitch Black talks about, which is counter to the majority of the startup world, and we've proven this time and time again, is that you do not need a product to prove that your idea is awesome. And in fact, the crazy thing is that it's actually harder when you do have a product to prove it because of what we talked about before. Once you launch, things get tough and it's really hard to get solid looking numbers, but you can prove up your idea in really non-biased ways well before getting into product development. And I'm going to go through a few examples here of how you can do that. And just before that, the reason this is so important as well is that the number one reason that startups fail is that they built something that the market didn't actually want. Their validation was shit. And this is based on a really big study by CB Insights. And you can see on the graph there, no market need. was right up there as the number one reason that startups fail. So this is about raising money, but more importantly, true non-biased validation is crucial to make sure that you don't end up wasting your own time and money pursuing the wrong idea. And a lot of people actually think that validation is going up to their friends and family or your cat and saying, hey, this is my idea, do you like it, or would you pay for it? And the problem with that is that couldn't be more biased. That's the least scientific approach that you could take to validating whether or not an idea is actually viable. So what we're going to go through now is 4 non-biased experiments that we run, really tangible ways that you can get momentum for your idea. And we do this for our own ideas, for anything that we launch ourselves, and we also do this with other founders that we help to get their ideas off the ground. So the first one is probably the simplest. It's just posting in online groups, and we're using Facebook as the example here, but you can post content like this in any of the online sort of forums or communities around the world to get this sort of result. And the power with this is that it's a lot more non-biased because these people don't generally know you, and you have access to a larger group of people than doing this in person one by one. So it's just simply posting up the problem you're experiencing and then asking people, is it a problem for them? How are they dealing with it? And for all of these examples, I'm going to use a sort of silly idea that we have internally here, which is that at Pitch Black in our head office in Collingwood, we're pretty shit at keeping our plants alive because we don't know who's watered what, how often you're meant to water the plants. So we've got the silly idea internally that you could have some sort of technology that reminds you of when to water it, who should do it, who has done it, all that sort of stuff. So we'll use this as sort of a novel idea for the 4 examples to give it context. So, and you can see in this post, it's someone from our team, Kerry, going out to a Facebook group and asking about other people's experience with this. And you're going to get some responses here that show different products that might exist. So you might find some competitors you didn't know about, whether or not people really think it is a big problem. If you get lots of people responding who are feeling that pain in a big way, then that's great early stage validation. And also, last little tip on this one, screenshot anything that you can to prove that pain is real, because you can use that in your investment presentations in the future. So any proof that you can get, screenshot everything, and that really backs up your case. Second one, this is really cool, and nearly no one that we speak to has either done this or thought of doing this. So any consumer idea, which is a product that you're selling to the general public, you can use Facebook to validate it in a non-biased way. So what you do is you create a fake Facebook account, a fake brand, and a fake name for your product. Don't use the one that you really like if you've already got a name you like, because you could sort of burn this name by testing multiple things. So create that fake sort of Facebook presence, and then create ads pretending like your product exists by mocking it up with some images and text, and send those ads to different audiences. And what that will do is, what you're trying to achieve is get pre-registrations for your product at a decent price per pre-registration. And what that proves is that you've actually got a real problem that's in the market, and that people are interested in a product to solve that problem. And you're also starting to show early signs of a strong business model. For this plant idea, if you're going to consumers, so mums and dads at home, if you're getting pre-registrations for $10 or $20, that's not a very good early signs that you're sitting on a good business, because you might not be able to make that much per customer. But if it was $1, $2, $3, $4, then you're showing good early signs that there's an opportunity here that's worth pursuing. So you learn a lot about how strong your idea is, and also the types of audiences that will actually like your idea. Some of these ads that we've run helping other startups, we thought the target market might be 30-year-olds, and it ended up being over 50-year-olds. So we cast a wide net to see what will happen. So you couldn't learn more about your business really quickly, and it's not a huge cost that you have to spend on Facebook to reach tens of thousands of people. So it's really non-biased data. Now the third one, Wizard of Oz, or I like to call this one the Swan. This is that for a lot of online ideas, you can often piece together a couple of different types of existing software, and you don't need to be able to code. You just need to be able to watch some, demonstration videos and figure it out. But you can actually piece together different types of software to almost pretend like your end version of your product exists. So it's a very light version of your product that can still deliver on the value. So, and I call it the Swan because if you think about the Swan, it's very graceful above the water and then the legs are going crazy beneath the surface of the water. So you might have to be doing manual things under the surface, but to the customer, it appears like they're getting a decent experience at least. Maybe not one you can charge for, but definitely one that you can get users using the type of product that you've got. So going back to our silly plan example, on here we've got software called Typeform on the left and then some other automation software called ActiveCampaign on the right. We've got some screenshots, but you could technically create an online form, which you don't need to be able to code to do, grab all of the information from the customer, whether it's business or people, about the plants they have, who's meant to be taking care of them, are they indoor or outdoor, all of that sort of simple data. And then once you get people to fill that online form out, and keep in mind it can be branded as your company, it can really look like your business, that online form, without having to code. Once you have all that data, then you can link that data and automate it in something like ActiveCampaign, which means that once you set it up correctly, they'll get their emails or SMSs, whatever you choose, at the time that they need to water the plant. So very simple. You could launch that within a day as opposed to waiting 3 months to build an app to do this. You learn a lot about the customer and you absolutely prove that people want a solution like this. Even if they were not willing to pay for it at this point, it's still pretty impressive to get people using your thing. And the last one, B2B, means business to business, which is a startup that targets a company as opposed to a general consumer. So if your solution is about signing up businesses to help them with a problem that they have internally, you should then be able to go out to those businesses and sign up some clients in pre-launch. And yes, you might need some things to show off, so it is a bit of a show and tell. It can take time, but it's absolutely possible, and startups all around the world do this. So all you need is what's called a letter of intent. So again, back to our plan example, we go door knocking around Collingwood, where we are in Melbourne, find businesses that have plants and tell them about this cool new thing that we're going to make, and then get them to give us a letterhead from their company signed by the decision maker saying that they are committing to using our product once it launches in, say, 4 months from now, that they know that it's going to be maybe free for 6 months, but then they pay a small subscription per month after that free trial, and there's commitment there from them. So signing up clients, if you're B2B, it's almost insulting to go out to investors expecting them to invest in your company when you haven't put in the effort of finding and signing up your customers in pre-launch. Really not that difficult. Also keep in mind, smaller businesses are quicker to get on board than larger businesses. So if it's only little companies you need, you can get lots of them. If you need a big company like a hospital, or it might be government related, it might be schools or enterprise, even getting one on board is pretty impressive, and that might be enough to raise the capital that you need. So moving on to the second P, perception. Now this is all about, people do actually judge books by their covers. To think any different is insane. And so branding and design is super important for early stage startups to be able to sell how serious they are to investors, to make you look credible and like you're not some shonky garage job. So here's a pretty funny quote from Cam, who's one of our partners here at Pitch Black. One of his startups, CNS Dose, helps people to figure out which antidepressant they should or shouldn't use. That's the value proposition that they've got, and they're doing big things now in the States. Right at the start of the journey, Cam and the team there raised $1 million pre-product with a spreadsheet, some proof of demand, and sexy designs. That's all they had, so they didn't build any software whatsoever. But when I asked him what the biggest thing was, he does say that design was the part that they put the most effort into, because they were really showing what the product was going to look like, even though they hadn't coded it at that point. So there's proof, if anything, $1 million in pre-launch from using this sort of method. So you need to have sexy shit if you want to look like an attractive startup to invest in. And the key kind of components to that we think are really important. One, brand, and keep in mind, brand is not a logo. Brand is the way you're positioned, it's your style guide, part of it is your logo, it's the way that you talk. Our brand, for our customer, we don't mind swearing. That's why this slide says shit. That's why our website says fuck on it. So for our brand, because we work with entrepreneurs who are rebellious, part of our brand is about not really caring what we say. It's this sort of, we don't care what the market thinks attitude, and that works really well for us. Branding even comes down to the way that you convey your message. Website is really important as well. You need to be able to link if you're sending something to someone on LinkedIn or to a potential investor, having something live on the website, just something simple, one page, but it needs to look beautiful and world class. And the last one, which is probably the most important, is prototypes or 3D renders. So a prototype, if it's software, this is not actually coding anything. A prototype is made by designing some of the key screens. It might be 5 or 6 of the key screens. So completely designing that workflow, making it look beautiful, then cutting up those designs, making things clickable and animating it. So you end up able to walk around with your mobile in your hand into key meetings, and you can actually demonstrate how your product, the main workflow in your product is going to work, which is super magical, and it's a lot quicker and cheaper, obviously, to produce a prototype than to actually code an MVP. So a lot of people call a prototype something that's coded. We think the simplest way of explaining it is it's just a cell. It doesn't work. It's not connected to any back end, and it's purely a sales tool to help you bring on customers and sales channels, and most importantly, investors. Or if your idea is a physical product, then 3D renders are the way to go for that. So again, this is purely a design process. You're not actually starting to engage factories to start putting together real things that you can touch and feel. That's not necessary, but a great first step in the right direction is being able to get great designers to sketch out and then render lifelike looking versions of your product, so you can show people on your iPad or on your computer or on your mobile when you're out in meetings to show the future vision of your product. So sexy shit, really, really important. You're not going to look serious and competitive to investors without having all of these things done at a really high quality. And the last P is passion. A lot of people forget about this. You need to convince investors not just about your idea, you need to convince investors that you are the best person to solve this problem, that you could be one of the leading people in the world to bring this idea to life. And that all comes down to passion. Our industry uses the term unfair advantage a lot. And what that's about is, does this founder have an unfair advantage against other people who might copy that idea in the future or compete with you? Do you have an edge against others in that space? And that could come down to the type of product that you're building. You might have a lot of industry domain expertise around that space and understanding, having key contacts or key intellectual property about that particular market. You might have technical skills in that space. So you might be able to do a bit of design yourself, or you might have a lot of experience in sales or marketing, or potentially even something code related or physical product related. So any technical skills as well makes you have an unfair advantage against other founders who might not have those skills. It makes you a lot more better equipped to manage a team who is technical in the future. And lastly, care factor. If your family had been affected by mental health, for example, and that was the driving force behind you wanting to create a mental health startup, that is a huge unfair advantage that will form part of your story and that you'll talk to investors about forever and a day, because someone who's been affected by the problem deeply that their startup is going to solve is highly unlikely to wake up in the morning and suddenly not care about that problem. So your care factor and your link to the problem that your startup is solving is a huge unfair advantage against people who might not have that emotional attachment to it. And it all comes down to vision, vision, vision. The best investors want to invest in founders who want to build something huge in the future, and they're convinced that they can do it. So of course you need to explain how you're going to get there and the small milestones that you'll have to hit, but as a general rule to investors, you need to be talking about where you can be in 5 years' time from now. Because they're not buying a portion of the company now. Really, they're buying a portion of the company now to get what it will be in the future. So always sell the future. That's again why prototypes are important, because you can sell a sexier version of your product than what it will be in the early days when it might not be as flashy. But sell the end game, sell how global this idea can be, how big the problem is around the world, and focus on that end game, not on where you're going to be in 12 months, which for no startups is good. It's always bad for every startup within 12 months. So to recap, quickly write this down, the 3 Ps: proof, perception, and passion. Make a note of it so that you don't forget. All right, moving on. So who can you go to for investment? This would be right up there in the top questions we're asked. People don't know whether to go to larger investors like VCs or angels or their own networks or business owners. So there's lots of options that you can go to. And really we break down the types of money that you can get invested into your idea or startup into 3 key categories: smart, dumb, and thinks they're smart. So smart money is any investor who can invest money into your business but will also add some type of strategic value to the company. So they might have a lot of experience in that space or networks. They might have built a really big company in that category in the past and sold it. Whatever it might be, if they're going to add value to their business, to your business, it's technically called smart money. That doesn't mean they have to have control of your business by any means or that they're going to be a director. It's just the type of investment that you've received. So the polar opposite to that is dumb money. And dumb money sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually, there's nothing wrong with it at all. And in pre-seed, it's definitely the lowest hanging fruit money to get in the early days. And I'll explain why in a second. So dumb money is just anyone that's going to invest who wants to go along for the ride. It could be someone in your networks, but it's just someone who really wants to have a punt on this startup. They understand that they can lose the money that they're going to invest. So it is a gamble like anything in business, but they're not going to be adding any value into your company, and you're not going to be hitting them up for advice or feedback on anything. So typically someone that's done money, they're just going to get their monthly email on an update. You could do get-togethers with your investors to sort of keep them in the loop and keep them excited, but the dumb money people aren't going to actually be active in your business in any way. And the third one, and this is the worst, these are in order of best to worst from top to bottom, and you need to be really careful of getting investment from people like this. People who think they're smart. Now, this is the person at a barbecue who is typically male, I'm going to say. Much higher chance that this person is male than female. But this is the person at the barbecue who knows everything about politics, religion, business, and life in general. They literally know everything, or in their mind, they do. These people are incredibly dangerous to take as an investor into your company. If they're already annoying before you've had them as an investor and you sort of cringe talking to them, you can't imagine how bad it is for them to actually own a portion of your company. You'll be getting text messages and calls from them hassling you. They will second guess every decision you make in your business and make you feel crowded. So it is much better to just walk away from those people. If there's any doubt in your mind, then it's not worth it. We've got a saying, one of our sort of 9 commandments at Pitch Black is that if it's not a fuck yeah, it's a no. That makes it really easy for choosing your investors. So when you think through your mind about all the people you know that could invest, really keep in mind that you don't want to be taking anyone on that is over opinionated or who could crowd you or thinks that they know everything. So smart money, amazing if you can get it, but in the early days, it can sometimes be harder because that smart money can often come from the second round onwards, that seed round. So really the lowest hanging fruit in pre-seed is that dumb money. People that are within a couple of degrees of separation of you, business owners, corporates, willing to put in 20, 30, 40K plus into something, willing to lose it, and they just want to go along for the ride and support you. They could be within 2 degrees of separation of you. So you might not know a lot of them, but they are accessible to you if you have the right approach. Big tip on how you get these people keen on investing. There's a saying that goes, if you ask for investment, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you get investment. So that's a big tip. You don't want to be desperate when you're raising money. So it's all about bringing people on the journey. Anyone that's well connected or could have some spare money to invest or who could help out, you just keep them in the loop as you hit these milestones, as you validate your idea and prove it up and get it investor ready. Keep them in the loop, ask them for feedback and advice. And what you find in Australia, which is an awesome thing about doing startups here, is that people will offer. If you keep them in the loop and it's exciting and they have a fear of missing out on the opportunity, it's amazing how many people will then offer without you having to ask. So don't ask, it can be needy. You just need to make the effort to bring everyone on the journey so that people have the opportunity to know what you're doing and they have the opportunity to offer to invest. Now, in our experience of doing this for a long time, raising money ourselves and investing in some things and helping a lot of other startups to get investment, these are 3 things that investors absolutely hate that you can avoid completely, which will make you look a lot better equipped than a lot of other founders in Australia. So First one, big myth buster, apps for the sake of apps. Now, ironically, a fair bit of the content that Pitch Black puts out online will talk about apps. And the reason for that is that a huge chunk of who we speak to believes that their idea should be an app as opposed to a website when they launch. Unfortunately, it's not true. We would say this would be one of the biggest myths in the startup space worldwide. And I want to do a little quiz with you. If you think right now, in the past month, how many apps do you think you would have downloaded versus websites that you've clicked on and visited? Now, keep in mind, you visit a website on anything news related, anything you click on Facebook, that goes to a website, or Twitter, any email link that you click on that goes to a website. All of those things make up websites. How many of those versus how many apps have you actually downloaded onto your phone in the last month? That figure is pretty scary usually, and I would say after asking hundreds and hundreds of people that question, the average would be, I would say, 300 websites versus 1 or 2 or even 0 apps, which is pretty scary. The reason for that, you might have your mind blown a little bit there. Everyone wants to do app ideas, but ironically no one downloads them. The reason for this is that there's a lot more friction in a user downloading an app than someone visiting a website. When we click on a link, we don't think about it. We just click and see where we end up, and maybe have a read, maybe sign up. There's no real friction in that process. But when you download an app, people are worried about things like how much space will it use on my phone? I don't have enough data this month. I don't want to go over my data limits on my plan. They might like the way that everything is arranged on all the folders that they have in their apps, and they don't want to make it look messier, which sounds crazy, but that's a big one. Or, as silly as this sounds, they could have even forgotten their password for the App Store or Google Play to download it in the first place. They just can't remember how to actually get the thing onto their phone. So that's a lot of points of what we call friction, which can prevent people from downloading an app. And the end output of that is that, if I could explain it in a sentence, it's way more expensive to get users onto an app than to get users to sign up on a platform. Whether they pay or not on either side of that spectrum, it's super, super difficult to get consumers to download apps. So it's a big, big myth. We have to say apps because everyone thinks that that's what they have, and then we sort of bring them in and educate them that they shouldn't do an app initially. It's also a lot more expensive than websites to build, and this is a big problem with app development companies who they make a lot more money by charging you to build an app than charging you to build a website. So this is, again, why we're against outsourcing building that technology, because you can get ripped off by service providers that have ill intentions. But we're not saying apps are bad long term. Once you do build a business and you've got users using your web platform, whatever it might be, it is a great value add in the future. Once you've got lots of users and you've raised more money, might be 2-3 years into your journey, it can be a great value add at that point to then come out with an app, because your users have a lot of frequency and they're loving the product already. So to go out and say, hey, we've now launched this app, is a great value add to that audience. But keep in mind, you never have to figure out when to do that. The point at which you do that is when all your customers are emailing you, hassling you for an app. And not just 1% of them. When like 20 or 30% of them keep hassling you about it, then you know it's the right time. So you never even have to figure that out. So take that in, relating to investment, going to an investor and saying that you have an app idea. You can see now, knowing that big sort of mind-blowing fact, you know now how that puts you in a basket that seems a lot more immature as a founder than people who know that. So definitely never forget that for any ideas you come up with in the future. So the second one, non-vested capital tables. Now, I'm not going to go into too much depth about this, but there's 2 terms that you should remember, and you can read into them more if you like. One is called vesting, and the other one is called cliffs. The reason that these 2 things exist is to protect companies from people under-delivering or leaving early from those startups. In startups, you have to break up the ownership of your startup into multiple different things. You, your business partners, your investors, and your team will often end up with equity, and even your advisors. So there's a whole bunch of people that need to get a slice of the pie so that they're motivated to get the company to an end win. Vesting in cliffs makes sure that you're not giving a big chunk of equity away up front to someone just to find out that they weren't the right person to be in your business. So as you can see on this graph, let's say that you've got someone that you want to give 4,000 shares in your company. And so the vesting on this graph goes over 4 years in this example. So it means if they leave halfway through on the 2-year mark, they're only going to get 2,000 shares because that's the only time that they're actually committed to the company. So they don't deserve to have any more than that. Really great mechanism to protect you, and you use vesting for everyone in the company other than investors, because investors buy their equity up front, so they shouldn't have to wait for it to accrue. But everyone else, your business partners, your team, your advisors, they all vest to make sure if someone bails early or they're not the right fit, the company is protected from giving away dead weight equity. Other term that's very important is a cliff. Now, a cliff is the equity equivalent of a probationary period in a employment contract. So when you get a salary somewhere for a job, they've usually got a 3-month probationary period. If you're shit at the start, it means they can easily get rid of you. Similarly, in startups, you do need to test people to make sure they are the right fit, and a cliff does exactly the same thing. So on this example, it's a year. You can choose however long you want your vesting or your cliffs to be. So it could be 3 months, could be 6 months, could be a year, whatever it might be. What happens is that the person serving time in the company doesn't get any equity until they hit that cliff. And once they reach that milestone, whether it's 3, 6, or 12 months, whatever you choose, then the equity automatically jumps up to what it would have been if it was accruing right from the start. And the reason that's really important is you shouldn't have to wait, in this example, for a year for them to start from zero. You've still served that time for the first year, and so it jumps up, and it's called a cliff because it literally looks like a cliff. So these two things, every great accelerator or venture capitalist in the world, it is mandatory that this is the way that your company is set up. Every single one of them, because they're worried that people could walk away. So knowing these two terms and how they work gives you a massive advantage to get that smart money that I spoke about earlier, because most founders we meet, nearly all of them, have no idea what those terms mean. All right, last one, I've sort of touched on it a little bit. The third one that investors hate, outsourcing your tech. And I'm just going to use a little case study here of an Australian startup called Trough of Sorrow You. I just read this on an article not too long ago. But essentially, the day that their app launched onto the App Store, Mackenzie acquired the development agency that they had outsourced their technology build for. It was a team of 12 in Malaysia, and they only got 10 days notice to try and solve this problem. So you can imagine, you've just launched a product, and now suddenly your whole entire team is ripped out of you because of a large international acquisition that you had no control or foresight over. This is exactly the reason that if you want to build a tech startup, whether it's software or hardware, you need to do everything you can to have control of your product. It's often cheaper to have it in-house, not in all cases, but in many cases it's cheaper. But most importantly, when you read back to the origin stories of all of the biggest successful tech startups, the magic always happened when they started, when they had a passionate entrepreneur or two, and then a technical person that could make that product happen, sitting next to each other, both working full-time, hustling their ass off. That is how the magic happens in our space. It does not happen by you staying in your job, paying an outsourced agency to try and build a successful company to you. Your chances of that turning into a multi-million-dollar business is next to none. So it's sort of common sense in our world. All great investors know this, and they expect that you have control of your product, yet there's a lot of noise out there from app development companies who are obviously trying to make 150 to 300 grand sale with you. So there's a lot of noise from people who have the wrong motivations trying to convince entrepreneurs that the right thing to do is to do it outsourced, but trust me, it's not. And there's not many examples of it going well. Now, earlier I mentioned that there's 3 sort of magical questions that you can ask when you've done and applied everything that I've taught in this webinar, and you're getting into the conversation of investment with someone. There's 3 magical questions that you can ask right at the end when they might be on that buying line and they just need that final push over the edge to commit to giving you the money. They might be challenging you on a few things, and you just want to draw it to a decision and get it across the line, whether it's a yes or a no. These are the magical questions that work wonders in sort of leading their mind to understand that it is a good investment opportunity. So the first one, do you believe that the problem that I'm solving is real? Do you believe that the problem that the startup is trying to go to the market to solve is a real problem that's worth actually solving, that it's justified that a new product or service will come into the market to solve it? So that's the first one, because if you can't get that, then you kind of lost anyways. Second one, do you believe Second one, do you believe that there will be at least one really big company solving this problem in 5 years from now? So that's sort of getting them to agree that, well, yes, that this idea seems so obvious and it seems so useful that, yeah, absolutely, I think 1, 2, 3, or 10 of these will exist around the world and will be doing well in the future. So that's just getting them to agree that this idea will happen regardless whether of you doing it or not, that someone's going to succeed doing this idea, which is a big sort of milestone to hit in their mind. And then the last one to sort of round it off, now, do you believe in me? Do you believe my team has a chance of being one of those companies? Not guaranteed, nothing's guaranteed in investment, but do you think we have what it takes? Based on you knowing me, or you've got a warm referral from someone else, do you think that we could be one of the companies to tackle this? As long as there's a yes, yes, yes on that front, and you followed the other things in this workshop, then that really all that's required in someone's mind to feel comfortable putting in the cash. And that applies to really any stage of the investment journey. So now, I want to recap on why did you show up today to this webinar. So you've got an idea that you've been sitting on, you know it could be worth millions of dollars, but you just don't know where to start. You want to launch your idea right away, but you don't have that sort of 150K, whatever it might be, that you can put in it yourself. It's just too risky. Or you might have that money, but to bet all of your life savings on this feels pretty scary, and it should feel scary. And you just want to be told what to do and how to do it so that you can get the investment for your idea and not run into all these avoidable mistakes that everyone else makes when they do a startup. And you might be thinking now, so how does Pitch Black fit into this equation, and what are the next steps? Like, how do we sort of initiate ever working with another founder? So our approach, as you've probably noticed from watching this, we're super relaxed. We don't like being too professional. We think that business should be really fun, and we have a lot of fun doing business with our work being our play by making sure that we only work with awesome people. We don't take any equity in your idea, so we don't end up owning a percentage in your company by working with us. We don't want to have 5 or 10% of hundreds and hundreds of companies. We don't want to wake up in the morning and have forgotten the companies that we part own. So we already have our own ventures that, again, you can see on my LinkedIn, and we don't have a desire to take equity in everyone else's idea, which is a bit of a point of difference. We don't develop apps. So again, even though a lot of our content talks about apps, we are really going up against app development companies and trying to educate founders to do their tech in-house. So whilst we do things like design and prototypes and brand and all of those sort of more design-centric services that are really important at the start, we do that because it's project work and we feel like it's ethical, and most coders can't design. So it's something that's needed by everyone. And we started doing that because people kept hitting us up saying that our own websites and platforms look really awesome, and so it was sort of just by accident that we fell into doing it. But we don't code as a service. It's a really important one. We want to help you raise money and then find your own coder to do it yourself. We have a sort of structured process that usually takes 3+ months to go from an idea to proving it up using some of the tools you saw before and get that sort of investor readiness story ready to the point that you could raise. So it doesn't happen overnight, and we like to sort of take an approach that does things at quality over speed. And lastly, we are pretty damn picky. We're only ever working on a handful of these sort of engagements one-on-one. We are busy still building our own businesses and starting to do a lot of more online things for Pitch Black. So it really just comes down to, do we really believe in the founder and your vision? Do we feel like you're serious? Do we think we're going to have a lot of fun working together? So we want to be picky with that because we're not interested in working with difficult clients. We want to be friends with the people that we work with and have a great time doing it. So the next step, if you're interested in chatting to either myself or my business partner Kim further about how we could potentially work together, the first thing to do is to fill in one of our application forms that you can see there. Only takes 2 minutes to fill out, and the intent is for us to learn more about you, the problem that you're looking to solve with your idea, why you want to get into this space, and then on the financial side, what your expectations were around how much do you think that you would have to invest personally into this idea to either create the product or even get it investor ready. So luckily, because we're not a software development agency, we tend to end up 5 to 7 times lower cost than development agencies that charge 150, 300K to build apps that often people never wanted in the first place. So it's definitely accessible, but it's not free. So we do want to understand what your expectations are around that. And on confidentiality, we do take that very seriously. So you're also going to get an email from us with our confidentiality policy, which explains that we won't do anything with your idea ourselves or talk externally from our company about your idea. So we do take that seriously, and you'll get that signed from us automatically by email. And we read 100% of these applications that come in, so either myself or Kim. So we will read everyone that comes in, and we get back to you within 48 hours either way. And the next steps after that, if it's looking good, is to jump on a phone call. Maybe we can give you some feedback on your idea around things that could be maybe hard about it that you might not have realized. From there, we can decide whether or not we want to work with each other. So we do like to take our time. As we said earlier, we don't like working with people who feel like hard work, so we do take our time a little bit in this process to make sure that our work feels like play. So thank you so much for coming into this. Click on that link now to go through to the application form. Only takes 2 minutes, and we really look forward to hearing from you. Chat soon.